The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning in Richmond, Virginia. Reporters filled the benches, some with notepads in hand, others already typing furiously into their laptops. The case had drawn national attention not because of the crime's scale, but because of its delicate, heart-wrenching nature. A 6-year-old girl named Emily Hart was at the center of it, and today, she was physically present in the courtroom for the first time, dressed in a simple light blue dress. Her hair tied in soft pigtails, Emily looked far too small for the large, solemn courtroom. She sat motionless beside her golden retriever, Max, a registered therapy dog trained specifically to assist children with trauma. Max had been her companion for over 6 months ever since she stopped speaking after the incident with her father. Her father, Robert Hart, was on trial for child endangerment and suspected abuse, although evidence had been vague and circumstantial. Until now, he had claimed Emily's injuries came from a fall down the stairs. But her silence since then had raised concerns. Unfortunately, with no vocal testimony and no eyewitnesses, the case had become a legal stalemate. Most believed the judge would be forced to dismiss it due to lack of evidence. That was until Emily showed up today, with Max. The judge, an older woman known for her strict but fair rulings, glanced at the young girl with a softened gaze. "We acknowledge the presence of minor Emily Hart, accompanied by her service animal, Max," she stated clearly. "The child is not expected to testify. She is here in observation only. Let's proceed." Robert Hart sat smugly at the defense table, his face emotionless. He wore a pressed suit and had a confident posture, occasionally glancing at the reporters with a subtle smirk. To the jury, he appeared calm and collected, but to Emily, seated directly across from him, that calm exterior masked something much darker, something only she and Max could truly sense. As the prosecutor began questioning a school nurse about past injuries Emily had sustained, Emily started to fidget slightly. Her small hands rubbed Max's ears for comfort, but then she subtly lifted her right hand and made a motion 3 fingers. Palm down, rotated once, and then pressed flat against her chest. Max's ears instantly shot up. No one else noticed. Not Emily. Repeated the gesture, this time more deliberate. Max stood on all fours, tense but silent, his gaze locked on Robert Hart, Emily's therapist. Seated several rows behind, saw the interaction and froze. She knew that hand signal. It was one Emily had been trained to use in therapy to indicate when she felt unsafe or threatened, especially when she was too scared to speak. Max moved in front of Emily, placing his body between her and her father. The jury began to murmur. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Is there an issue with the dog?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. Before anyone could answer, Max barked loud and commanding, one single bark that rang through the courtroom like a fire alarm. Robert flinched. The defense attorney stood up, flustered. "Your Honor, this is highly inappropriate." "Quiet," the judge snapped. "Bailiff, secure the courtroom." Emily remained still, her hand now resting on Max's back, but she made the gesture one more time, clearly this time, locking eyes with her therapist as if begging for her to act. The therapist didn't hesitate. She rushed to the front, bypassing protocol. "Your Honor, that hand motion, it's not random. It's a therapeutic signal for emergency distress. Emily has only used it twice before, and both times, it was valid." Gasps rippled through the audience. The judge leaned forward, studying the little girl, who sat in silence. "She's never reacted to anyone like this, not even on video calls," the therapist continued. "And Max is trained to respond when she feels she's in danger. I believe her body is remembering what her voice can't yet say." The judge turned to the bailiffs. "Remove the jury from the courtroom immediately. This hearing is in recess until further notice." As the jurors filed out, stunned and whispering, the judge ordered a private chamber meeting with the therapist, child psychologist, and legal counsel. Emily was escorted to a separate room, Max walking protectively beside her. Reporters rushed. To file the breaking development, the internet began buzzing. Dog interrupts trial. Service animal senses threat during testimony. But inside the courthouse, a far more serious shift was occurring. In that private room, the judge leaned back in her chair and sighed. "What we saw today cannot be ignored. We need to reevaluate the validity of the child's communication and the role her trauma may have played in hiding the truth." Meanwhile, Emily sat in a child-friendly interview room. The walls were painted with soft clouds, and plush toys filled the corners. She didn't touch them. She held Max tightly. A gentle woman named Dr. Sandra Michaels sat down across from her with a series of picture cards. "Emily, can we play a game with Max?" she asked softly. Emily didn't nod or speak, but her grip on Max relaxed just slightly. Dr. Michaels pulled out cards, photos of people, objects, locations. Each time Emily saw a picture of her mother or teacher, Max remained calm. But when a photo of her father was shown, Max growled. And when Emily made the hand gesture once more, eyes full of tears, but without a sound, Dr. Michaels knew this child had been telling the truth all along without a word. Inside the cozy child interview room, a different kind of truth-telling began to unfold without loud testimony, without shouting lawyers, and without any words from the little girl at the center of it all. Emily sat cross-legged on the rug, Max curled protectively beside her, eyes never leaving the therapist seated across from them. Dr. Sandra Michaels, a seasoned trauma psychologist, worked slowly and gently. She had dealt with children like Emily before, children whose silence wasn't just emotional, but survival. And yet, even she was stunned by how much could be conveyed with just gestures, facial expressions, and one exceptionally loyal dog. Emily picked up a small toy block and began tapping it against Max's paw in a repetitive rhythm. The dog didn't flinch, he simply lowered his head, watching her. Then Emily reached out toward the deck of emotion cards laid out by Dr. Michaels. She paused, picked one with a picture of a frightened face, and placed it on the floor. Max 10Z. Dr. Michaels leaned in. Is that how you feel, sweetheart? Emily didn't nod. Instead, she turned the card upside down, slid it toward a photograph of her father on the table, and looked up at the therapist. Her eyes were wet, but her face was expressionless. It was as if all her emotion was hidden deep, buried beneath fear and years of confusion. Max shifted his body again, placing himself slightly in front of her, as if guarding her from the very image on the table. This was enough. Dr. Michaels turned to the detective, observing from behind the two-way mirror, and gave a subtle nod. Something was surfacing, something real and something serious. Back in the courtroom, the legal team was in disarray. The sudden shift in momentum had shaken the defense. Robert Hart sat in the corner room with his lawyer, visibly sweating now, something his stoic exterior hadn't shown earlier. This is ridiculous, Robert muttered. She's 6. She can't even talk. That dog barked, and now everyone thinks I'm guilty. His attorney, trying to remain composed, leaned in. It's more than a bark. Her therapist recognized the hand signal. The judge is taking it seriously. If they open the case again with new psychological evidence, we could be in trouble. Robert stood and began pacing. She fell. I told them she fell. Then you better hope her dog and that kid can't prove otherwise. Meanwhile, Judge Allen summoned the child protection specialist, Emily's therapist, and Dr. Michaels to a private chamber. The gravity in the room was heavy. The judge leaned forward, her fingers interlaced. Based on the child's behavior, her therapist's interpretation of the signal, and the dog's repeated reaction, I believe we're looking at possible new evidence, she said. Dr. Michaels, do you believe this child is expressing memory or coaching? Memory, Dr. Michaels said without hesitation. Her reactions are involuntary. They align with known trauma responses. The dog's behavior, though it maybe also validates her fear, as instinctive. The judge nodded solemnly. Then I am authorizing a re-examination of the initial incident scene, medical reports, and any prior interviews that might have been influenced by fear. We cannot proceed as if nothing has changed. Word began to spread that the case was far from over. Reporters caught wind of the judge's decision, and headlines began shifting from trial on verge of collapse to shock twist and child abuse case. Social media buzzed with clips of service dogs, debates about child testimony, and support for Emily and Max, who were now becoming symbols of something larger. The court reconvened the following day with fewer cameras and tighter restrictions. The judge wanted the focus to stay on justice, not sensation. Emily, again, accompanied by Max and her therapist, was brought into a specially arranged room connected to the courtroom via video stream. She would not have to face her father again. This time, a forensic child interviewer guided her through a session using pictures, toys, and interaction with Max. When asked about the day of the fall, Emily pointed to a drawing of stairs, then immediately picked a hurt card. But when shown a drawing of a man pushing, she touched it and stared down at the table. Max growled again. The moment was chilling. In the courtroom, prosecutors exchanged glances. Defense attorneys scribbled furiously on notepads, their strategy crumbling before their eyes. Next came the medical re-examination reports. A pediatric trauma specialist testified that the bruising on Emily's shoulder was inconsistent with a fall down the stairs. It was more in line with a grip and shake. Another doctor confirmed there were faint finger marks, previously dismissed as accident-related, now re-evaluated under forensic imaging. Prosecutors made a bold move, a motion to admit Emily's recorded video, interview, and Max's behavioral reactions as valid supporting testimony under special child protection allowances. The judge agreed it was an unusual path to truth, but one built on empathy, science, and instinct. Emily never spoke. She didn't have to. Max had become her interpreter, her protector, and in many ways, her voice. Across the courtroom, Robert Hart now looked pale. He clenched the armrests of his chair, his lips twitching. His eyes darted nervously between the video monitor and the jury box. The mask he had worn for months, perhaps years, was slipping. Max, sitting quietly next to Emily in the video feed, had not taken his eyes off the screen. The tension was so thick, it silenced even the press. The truth was surfacing not through aggressive cross-examinations or dramatic witness reveals but through the unwavering bond between a child and her dog. It was the kind of justice no one saw coming. But it had finally begun. The courtroom had never felt so quiet. The kind of silence that didn't just fill the room, it choked it. The air was thick with realization. A little girl who hadn't spoken a word in over 6 months had said everything through her hands and through her dog, and now, nothing in the trial felt safe, predictable, or clear. Everything was suddenly under a different light. Robert Hart's defense team scrambled to recover. Their case had been built on a single, fragile assumption that Emily couldn't testify, and that without her voice, there would be no proof. But now, her voice had come forward in a form no one could have expected. A silent hand gesture and a dog's growl had cracked the courtroom wide open. The video of Emily's nonverbal testimony, played during the private session, had left the courtroom emotionally shaken. Her reactions weren't coached, and Max's behavior couldn't be denied. These weren't tricks. This was trauma made visible, and it couldn't be unseen. Judge Allen called for a 15-minute recess to let everyone regroup. Emily and Max were escorted to a private room with soft lighting and a warm rug. Emily immediately curled up next to Max, burying her face in his neck. The golden retriever rested his head gently over her legs, never letting go of that calm, watchful presence. Her therapist sat nearby, offering quiet reassurance. Outside, news reporters were already calling the case one of the most shocking child protection trials in recent memory. Commentators on television debated whether a dog's behavior should be used as supporting evidence. Some scoffed, most defended it. Sometimes a child can't say it. One trauma expert said on live TV, but that doesn't mean she's not screaming inside. Back in court, Judge Allen returned with firmness in her tone. This court acknowledges new evidence in the form of behavioral analysis from the child witness, Emily Hart, and corroborative reaction from a certified trauma response service dog. A motion is granted to re-examine all medical findings and prior witness testimony in light of this development. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Robert looked furious now, arms crossed tightly, his foot tapping nervously. He didn't seem calm anymore. His face was red. His eyes darted from the judge to the jury, as if searching for someone who might still be on his side. But the weight of the room had shifted entirely. The prosecution rose with a stack of new medical reports and psychological assessments in hand. We request to bring forward Dr. Karen Lowe, a pediatric trauma specialist, said the prosecutor. She has reviewed Emily Hart's medical records and conducted a fresh analysis under court order. Dr. Lowe, a woman in her 50s with kind but confident eyes, stepped up to the witness stand. Her presence was calm and direct, exactly what the moment required. She began by outlining the original injury report. Bruises on Emily's shoulder, a fracture in her forearm, and a cut along her scalp. At the time, these injuries were written off as consistent with a fall. But now, with access to Emily's body scans, photos, and interviews, Dr. Lowe gave a different interpretation. The bruising pattern on the upper arm is consistent with forceful grabbing, more specifically, with the imprint of adult fingers, she said, holding up an image of a detailed scan. Additionally, the forearm injury appears to be defensive. Children will often raise their arms when shielding themselves. Could these have occurred during a fall down the stairs? Asked the prosecutor. Dr. Lowe shook her head. Not in this combination, and not with this distribution. A fall alone would not have caused such linear bruising and forearm fractures in this pattern. Whispers echoed through the courtroom. The defense lawyer stood. Is it possible these injuries were caused unintentionally by the father trying to stop her from falling? Dr. Lowe paused. It's a possibility. But if you compare this scan to known defensive injury patterns, it aligns far more closely with an abuse scenario. Max's growl from the video replay still echoed in everyone's minds. As Dr. Lowe stepped down, the courtroom remained locked in silence. The prosecution had another move to make. We also request the court view a brief, recorded interaction between Emily and her dog, Max, when exposed to various photostimuli. The prosecutor continued. These include family members and neutral images. The judge nodded. Proceed. The screen came to life again. Emily sat with her therapist in the quiet therapy room. A stack of photos was laid out. Her mother, her teacher, her neighbor, and finally her father. Max was calm for the first 3. His eyes blinked, his tail flicked, but when the photo of Robert Hart was laid in front of Emily, Max rose abruptly, placing himself between Emily and the table. He began to growl, low and sharp. Emily didn't flinch. She made the hand gesture again. Even the defense attorney dropped his pen. The video ended. Silence returned. Judge Allen took a long breath. This court accepts this video as supplemental behavioral testimony, confirming patterns of fear and protection consistent with child abuse scenarios. Robert's lawyer leaned toward him and whispered, "You're losing this." Robert stared ahead, jaw locked. "She's just a kid. This is emotional manipulation." "No," his lawyer whispered. "This is justice, catching up." In the hallway outside the courtroom, parents, trauma survivors, and child advocates gathered, some in tears, many in quiet awe. What was happening inside wasn't just a trial, it was a turning point. For every child who had been too scared to speak, for every victim who had once been dismissed due to silence. This moment was a reckoning. Inside, Emily remained unaware of the national attention her story was getting. All she knew was that Max had stayed by her side, he had barked when she couldn't, he had growled when she froze, and he had stood up when she felt small. The trial was no longer about proving guilt. It was about listening differently. After the powerful video was shown in court, the entire trial had entered a new phase, no longer focused solely on facts and testimony, but on patterns, behaviors, and a truth hiding in plain sight. The girl who couldn't speak was now teaching everyone how to listen differently, and the dog once seen as a quiet support animal had become a crucial part of the case. Prosecutors acted quickly. They requested access to Emily's original therapy notes and sketches, with consent from her therapist and legal guardian. Emily had been in trauma therapy for several months. While she never spoke, she often drew, colored, and reacted non-verbally. Those drawings, once kept private as part of her healing, now had potential legal significance. Back in the therapy office, Dr. Michaels carefully sorted through Emily's binder. Dozens of pages held colorful images, flowers, rainbows, animals, but scattered among them were darker scenes, stick figures falling downstairs, one figure crying in the corner, while another loomed tall with large hands drawn in heavy black crayon. Several drawings showed a girl and a dog always side by side. On one page, the dog stood growling between the child and a figure marked with an angry red X. When asked about the drawings again in a supervised session, Emily hesitated. Then she slid the page with the red X forward. Max pressed closer to her, his nose nudging her hand. She looked down, then raised her hand and made the familiar gesture. Against her chest, the signal for fear, for danger. This time, she wasn't in the courtroom. She was surrounded by safety, by people who believed her and a dog that would never let anyone near her without permission. And so she reached for a photo of her father and set it beside the drawing. The therapist looked at the investigator in the observation room and gave a slow, quiet nod. Later that evening, Detective Laura Monroe, assigned to the reopened case, arrived at the Hart home with a new warrant. The house had already been searched months ago after Emily's injury, but the original sweep had been light, barely serviceable. Robert had been cooperative, even overly helpful, which had raised no suspicion at the time. But now, they were looking with new eyes. In the basement, Monroe found what she didn't know she was looking for, a shelf lined with tools, books, and folders. One binder had Emily's name scribbled on the spine. Inside were pages from her old schoolwork and behavioral notes sent home from preschool, some crumpled, some marked with angry red ink. Many were full of scribbles and notes in Robert's handwriting. But wedged in the back was something far more disturbing, a printed guide from an unregulated discipline method book, outlining harsh punishments for children labeled as disobedient. Margins were filled with Robert's notes, referencing Emily's episodes of crying and silence. Detective Monroe's jaw tightened. She bagged the binder as evidence and continued searching. Upstairs in Emily's old room, an unused closet had several broken toys shoved into a corner. Underneath the pile was a small dollhouse. But when lifted, the carpet beneath was stained just faintly, but noticeably. When tested with a forensic light, the mark lit up. This, too, was documented. Photos were taken. Samples were secured. Everything that had seemed unclear now had a chilling clarity. The next morning, the evidence was brought into court under seal. Only the judge, legal teams, and selected child advocates were allowed to review it. Judge Allen, visibly affected, spoke to both teams. New findings have shifted the trajectory of this case. Given the physical evidence from the home and the behavioral consistency of the child's responses, we will be moving toward a criminal abuse charge in addition to endangerment. The defense objected, claiming the evidence could be misinterpreted or was circumstantial. The prosecution countered, so was Emily's silence until it wasn't. Meanwhile, Emily's therapist continued her work with the little girl, helping her express even more through play. One session involved clay figures. Emily molded a small dog and girl, then added a tall figure that she pushed over with her fingers. She smiled softly after that. It was the first time she'd shown even a flicker of relief. Max, ever the silent guardian, had sensed the shift, too. He rested more peacefully now, curling up at Emily's feet rather than sitting alert. The tension in her body had softened, if only slightly. She still didn't speak, but her trust had deepened. She now reached for Max first, without fear. Whenever she was unsure. Outside the courthouse, the public's response had turned emotional and fierce. Parents held vigils. Advocacy groups raised funds for service dogs like Max. Trauma specialists published open letters about the importance of believing children, especially when they couldn't use words. The story was no longer just about one girl. It had become a symbol of hope and reform. Reporters caught every detail: how a child had cracked a case without a single sentence, How a dog had read fear where humans had missed it, and how a court that nearly closed the door on justice was forced to reopen it wide. Back in court, Emily was invited to place a handprint on an official child witness record, a symbolic act acknowledging her presence and her silent bravery. She pressed her tiny palm in blue ink and placed it gently on the paper. Then she turned and hugged Max tightly. It was a small act, but the entire room stood in silence, many with tears in their eyes. Max had spoken. Emily had answered. And the truth, so long ignored, was finally heard. The trial had changed. No longer was it a delicate case, teetering on the edge of dismissal. Now it was a storm of revelations, each one confirming the silent cries of a little girl and the protective instincts of her loyal dog. The judge had called for a full reopening of the abuse investigation. And with every passing day, more truth surfaced from the shadows of Emily's past. In court, prosecutors brought forward Dr. Karen Lowe once again, this time to walk the jury through Emily's updated medical reports. The doctor laid out comparisons of original scans with recent analyses, pointing out signs previously dismissed: finger-shaped bruises, defensive wounds, inconsistent fall patterns. But it wasn't just about injuries anymore, it was about interpretation. How could so much have been overlooked? Trauma often presents quietly in children, Dr. Lowe explained. They may not cry out, they may not run, they freeze, and they go silent. That silence is misread as consent, or even recovery. But it's not, it's survival. The courtroom listened, many stunned. And through it all, Robert Hart sat expressionless, though the flush in his face betrayed a building storm. His hands clenched the arms of his chair, as if holding back a dam ready to burst. The prosecution wasn't done. Next came the turn of Emily's preschool teacher, Miss Adina Ramosa Warm. Attentive woman who had been the first to express concern about Emily's withdrawn behavior months before the incident. Noticed bruises on her arms several times. Ms. Ramos said, when I asked her what happened, she'd go still. Her eyes would fill with tears, but she wouldn't say anything. She never blamed anyone, but she always looked afraid. Did you report this to anyone? The prosecutor asked. Yes, I reported it twice, she replied, but with no verbal confirmation from Emily, and her father always having an explanation. It didn't go anywhere. The courtroom buzzed at her words. It was clear now, the system hadn't just missed sin, had failed her entirely. Then came the binder from Robert's house, the one with his notes, punishments, and discipline strategies. The court heard disturbing details from it, including annotated pages from controversial parenting manuals marked with Robert's handwriting. When she doesn't listen, remove food for a day. Punish silence, force her to sit in the dark, no dog, no toys, until obedience. Gasps filled the courtroom. The defense tried to object, claiming the notes were irrelevant, but the judge allowed them, citing emotional coercion and psychological harm as relevant to child abuse patterns. The final witness for the day was Officer Laura Monroe, the detective who had recovered the binder and searched Emily's bedroom. Again, she recounted finding the stained carpet under the dollhouse and how the markings had tested positive for blood, matched to Emily's. Robert's expression broke for the first time. He looked down, pale, trapped. The prosecution rested its case that evening, and the courtroom, once full of uncertainty, now felt like it had heard the voice of a child who never spoke a word. That night, Emily rested peacefully for the first time in weeks. She lay curled in her bed at her aunt's home, Max beside her as always. Her therapist visited before bedtime and brought her a new coloring book, filled with pictures of animals and peaceful scenes. Emily pointed to one image, a girl holding a dog's leash in front of a courthouse, and quietly began to color it. She used bright yellow for the dog, then pink for the girl's dress. Then, slowly, she added a soft blue background. It was the first time she'd used color without drawing fear into the picture. Her therapist smiled, blinking away tears. You're so brave, Emily, she whispered. You're showing everyone the truth, all without saying a word. Emily looked up, then reached across Max's back and made a different hand signal, this one meaning safe. It was a small moment, but monumental. Back in court, the next day, Robert Hart took the stand. The room was silent as he walked to the witness chair. Every eye watched him. For a moment, he looked steady. Then the questioning began. The prosecutor's tone was calm but direct. Mr. Hart, do you deny ever using excessive punishment against your daughter? I disciplined her like any parent would, Robert answered, avoiding eye contact. What about the binder with handwritten notes on punishments, starving, isolation, even denying her access to her service dog? Robert tensed. They were thoughts, notes. I didn't do all those things, but some you did. I didn't hurt her, he muttered. Then how do you explain the bruises, the bloodstains, her repeated fear responses to your photo, and her dog's aggressive reactions only to you? Robert's mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no answer came. Finally, the prosecutor delivered the blow. Emily doesn't speak because of what you did, but her silence has become louder than your words. Robert leaned back in the chair, looking away. His lawyer had no questions. The courtroom fell into a silence that said everything. As the day ended, the judge addressed the court. This trial has presented one of the most unique paths to truth I've ever seen. A child's voice was heard not through speech, but through consistent, credible behavior supported by professionals and one incredibly loyal service animal. This court acknowledges Emily Hart as a valid, courageous witness to her own story. Tears welled up in nearly every eye in the room. Emily was not in court that day, but in her home. She watched the judge's words live on television. Her therapist beside her, Max's head rested in her lap. She reached out and gently touched the screen, as if claiming her place in that courtroom from afar. The truth had come to light, and the darkness that once tried to silence her was fading. By the time the fifth day of the reopened trial came to a close, the world beyond the courtroom was no longer just watching it, was standing with Emily. What had started as a quiet local trial in Richmond, Virginia, had exploded across national news networks and social media platforms. Television anchors reported live updates from the courthouse steps. Newspapers ran emotional headlines like, "The dog who spoke for a silent child," Max, the golden retriever that changed a courtroom. Emily's silence shattered the system. Everyone's hearts, people across the country were captivated not by the tragedy alone, but by the courage. The image of a little girl clinging to her dog as he barked in court had become iconic. A moment that could have been dismissed as chaos had instead become the spark of justice. Talk shows featured child psychologists and dog trainers discussing trauma, service animals, and the power of nonverbal communication. Pet lovers began fundraising for children's therapy dog programs. Police departments reached out to their local courts, offering to implement trauma-sensitive support during child testimonies. Emily's story was creating waves and, not just in law, but in hearts. Back inside the courtroom, the trial entered its final stages. But the tension never faded. The defense was exhausted, their arguments hollow. They claimed misinterpretation. They tried to blame Max, saying his behavior could be coincidental or even triggered by training flaws. But when questioned about who trained Max, the answer silenced the courtroom. Emily did under close supervision of her therapist and licensed behavior specialists. Max had been taught over time to identify Emily's stress signals, but his deep connection with her wasn't programmed. It was love, loyalty, intuition, something no defense argument could dismantle. To reinforce this, the prosecution called Dr. Rachel Nguyen, a renowned canine behavioral expert. She had studied Max's interactions in videos, therapy sessions, and even during the initial courtroom outburst. "What is your professional opinion of Max's behavior in court?" the prosecutor asked. "Authentic and protective," Dr. Nguyen replied without hesitation. "This is not the reaction of a dog acting on command. This is a response to trauma and emotional shifts in the child. Max has formed a bond that is stronger than any learned behavior." "Is it possible that Max sensed danger that others did not?" "Yes," Dr. Nguyen nodded. "Dogs are incredibly attuned to human fear. In children, that instinct multiplies especially when the child can't express it verbally. Max is more than a pet. He's her guardian." The jury leaned in. Some even smiled. It wasn't just that Max was convincing them, it was that Max had already proven himself when the system had failed. Meanwhile, Emily's story reached the White House press room. A reporter asked the National Press Secretary if the president had seen the footage of Max in court. The response, yes, and like the rest of the country, he was moved. "We're exploring ways to support programs that give more children access to trained service animals like Max." Emily didn't know any of this. Her therapist and aunt shielded her from the media storm. To Emily, the world still felt small, just her, Max, and a few safe people, and that was okay. She needed safety more than fame. Still, her therapist noticed something changed in her since the court recognized her as a valid witness. Emily smiled more. She colored scenes with more blue and yellow. She began humming softly at first while drawing. And Max, who once sat always alert, now sometimes dozed off beside her, finally at ease. They both sensed the shift. One morning, while brushing Max's fur, Emily picked up a small chalkboard from her play area and wrote a word, safe. Her aunt cried when she saw it, not because it was the first word Emily had written since the incident, but because of what that word meant. It wasn't just something Emily had heard, it was something she now felt. Back in court, closing arguments began. The prosecutor addressed the jury with calm intensity. "You've seen what we've seen. A child's fear, a dog's instinct, and evidence that couldn't lie. Emily Hart may not have spoken, but she told us everything. Her fear was real. Her silence was not absence, it was survival. And when the justice system nearly overlooked her, Max barked. That bark saved her." Then the prosecutor paused. The truth was there the whole time. It just didn't come in words. It came in loyalty. The defense gave a brief rebuttal, citing emotion as a distraction and reminding the jury that the law required certainty. But the words rang hollow. Nothing could outshine the clarity that had already been shown. The judge dismissed the jury to deliberate. And then, the wait began. During that evening recess, people gathered outside the courthouse, holding candles and signs that read, "We believe you, Emily Max. Hero of the year, every child deserves a voice." Dogs sat beside their owners, some wearing service vests. Children colored pictures of Emily and Max on the courthouse steps. News stations broadcast the peaceful vigil live, and at home, Emily sat in her room with Max and her therapist. She wasn't watching the news. She was building a puzzle, the last piece shaped like a heart. She placed it gently in the center and whispered something only Max could hear. He licked her hand and lay down beside her. The next morning, the jury returned. They had deliberated for only 4 hours. That was all they needed. The court was filled again. Cameras were banned, but every seat was taken. Emily was not brought in, but she didn't need to be. She was everywhere in that room. Robert Hart stood with his lawyer, his face pale, fingers twitching. The judge asked the foreperson, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." "In the case of Robert Hart, on the charges of child abuse and endangerment, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." The word rang like thunder, and just like that, justice had spoken. But long before that, a little girl and her dog already had. The courtroom burst into restrained emotion. Gasps, tears, quiet sobs, and even faint applause came from observers the moment the word guilty was spoken. It was not a moment of triumph, it was a moment of release. The weight that had hung over the hearts of everyone involved had finally begun to lift. Robert Hart stood frozen, the color drained from his face. His jaw clenched tightly, but he said nothing. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, as if to brace him for the coming blow. Judge Allen, who had watched the entire trial unfold with firm resolve, spoke immediately after the verdict was read. "This court finds sufficient evidence and testimony to declare Mr. Robert Hart guilty on all charges, including felony child abuse, psychological harm, and endangerment of a minor. Sentencing will be announced tomorrow at 10 a.m. Court is adjourned for the day." Bailiffs approached Robert. His eyes darted around the courtroom, but no one looked back. No one stood in his defense. For once, the silence wasn't Emily's. It was his. As he was handcuffed and led away, the cameras outside the courthouse caught a glimpse of his face, blank, stunned, no longer smug. The very system he had once hidden behind had turned to protect the one he thought would never be believed. Back at her aunt's house, Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her drawing pad in front of her. Her therapist had brought a new box of colored pencils. This time, Emily chose the color green, a color she'd never used before. She slowly sketched a big backyard with tall trees, a swing, and a sun shining above a house. In the middle of the picture, a girl stood, smiling beside a golden retriever with a heart-shaped tag. She labeled the girl, Me, and wrote Max under the dog. Then, slowly and carefully, she added something new, a speech bubble over the girl's head that simply said, "Thank you." It was the first time she'd drawn herself speaking. Her therapist sat nearby, watching in quiet awe. "Emily," she whispered, "you're healing." Emily didn't look up, but she nodded just once and smiled faintly. The following day, sentencing was swift. Judge Allen delivered the decision in front of a courtroom. Still heavy with emotion, Robert Hart is hereby sentenced to 25 years in prison without parole for multiple counts of child abuse and endangerment. She declared, "No contact with the victim will be permitted. All parental rights are revoked." The child, Emily Hart, is now under the legal guardianship of her maternal aunt, Rachel Monroe, and her service dog Max will remain permanently in her care. A cheer rose briefly in the crowd, followed by respectful silence. The judge gave one final look to the press bench. "Let it be known that this case is a reminder. A child's voice may not come as sound, but that doesn't mean we don't hear it." Outside, people erupted in cheers. Banners waved. Families hugged. Reporters announced the sentence with emotional clarity. Headlines read, "Justice for Emily. Court rules in favor of child and her dog." New chapter begins for girl who changed everything. In the weeks that followed, life slowly began to shift for Emily. Her Aunt Rachel turned their modest home into a comforting space filled with color and warmth. She painted Emily's room sky blue and hung her drawings on the wall like masterpieces. Max had a new bed at the foot of hers, though he still preferred to sleep right beside her. No one questioned it. Emily still didn't talk much, but she didn't need to, not yet. Her silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful now. Sometimes, she would hum as she colored. Other times, she'd write small words on her chalkboard. Each day, her confidence grew like a sapling, breaking through the soil after a storm. One afternoon, Emily and Max visited a children's center that specialized in animal-assisted trauma recovery. Max became an instant hero to the kids there. They ran their fingers through his golden fur, amazed at how calm he was, how protective yet gentle. Emily watched quietly, then drew pictures for each child. At the bottom of every drawing, she signed her name with a tiny heart beside it. Staff at the center offered Emily the chance to share her story someday. Through art, letters, or even a book. Emily didn't respond. But later that night, she picked up her sketch pad and began drawing a book cover, Max and Me, a story without words. Meanwhile, across the country, change was brewing. Lawmakers proposed new legislation called Emily's Voice, designed to provide expanded courtroom protections for child victims and to allow therapy animals as certified witnesses in trauma cases. The proposal included funding for trained service dogs and advanced nonverbal communication therapy for young survivors. One senator stated during a press conference, "Children like Emily deserve to be heard of on if they don't speak. We owe it to them to listen in every way we can." Emily's case had inspired a wave of compassion, reform, and awareness that couldn't be stopped. On the one-month anniversary of the trial's conclusion, Emily's therapist surprised her with something special, her ceremony at the courthouse, where Max would be honored as an official guardian of justice. The city had created a new award in his name for service animals who supported survivors of trauma. The judge, prosecutors, therapists, and volunteers gathered for the event. The courtroom was decorated with flowers and paw-print banners. Emily walked in holding Max's leash, her hand trembling just a little. But when she looked up and saw the smiles, the gentle faces, and the golden badge engraved with Max, defender of the brave, she took a deep breath. Judge Allen stepped forward. "Emily, you may not have spoken during your trial, but you taught us something none of us will forget." And Max, well, Max reminded us all what loyalty really looks like. The crowd applauded as Max was given a gold tag and Emily a small silver star on a chain. She held it tightly in her hand. Then, for the first time since the trial began, Emily stepped up to the microphone. She looked out at the small audience, then down at Max. And in a soft, trembling voice, she whispered, "He heard me when no one else did." The room went silent. Then the applause came not for the tragedy, but for the courage. Not just for the girl who survived, but for the girl who would thrive. Justice had been served. But now, healing had truly begun. Months had passed since the courtroom drama that had captured a nation's heart. Emily's life, once shadowed by silence and fear, had begun to blossom in ways no one had dared to imagine. Her days were filled with simple joys, morning walks with Max in the park, afternoons spent painting under the golden sunlight, and evenings cuddled on the couch with her Aunt Rachel, reading storybooks out loud. Though Emily's voice remained soft and rare, her spirit was no longer trapped. She had learned that words, though powerful, were not the only way to be heard. Max remained her constant companion. He was more than a service dog. He was a symbol of survival and hope. Together, they had traveled beyond therapy rooms and courtrooms into schools and community centers, teaching others about the silent struggles many children face. Emily had become an ambassador for children's trauma awareness. With her aunt's help, she helped launch the Max and Me Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing therapy dogs and trauma-informed care to children nationwide. The foundation's mission was clear: to ensure that no child's silence went unheard and no dog's protective instincts went unrecognized. One crisp autumn morning, Emily stood on a small stage at a local community center, surrounded by families, therapists, and children with their own therapy animals. The room buzzed with excitement. Emily clutched Max's leash tightly. She looked at the sea of faces before her, many who knew her story, many who had been inspired by her courage, and some who, like her, struggled with the shadows of trauma. The room fell quiet as Emily stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was soft, but steady. "Sometimes," she began, "when words don't come, other things do. A hand gesture, a look, a dog's bark. These can all be voices." She paused, squeezing Max's leash gently. Max sat beside her, calm and loyal, as always. Emily smiled. "Max heard me when I couldn't speak, and he helped me find my voice again. You don't have to be afraid to tell your story because someone will listen, even if they don't use words." The audience burst into applause. Tears glistened on many cheeks. Emily's story had come full circle, from silence to voice, from fear to strength. Behind the scenes, Emily's healing continued. Her therapist, Dr. Michaels, explained that progress in trauma recovery wasn't always linear. Emily's journey shows that healing is possible. She said in an interview, "She taught us that communication isn't just about talking. It's about being seen, being understood, and being safe." Max provided that for her. He was the bridge between silence and safety. Emily's Aunt Rachel agreed. Max saved Emily's life, not just physically, but emotionally. They are partners in healing, and their story reminds us that love and loyalty can be the greatest form of protection. Meanwhile, the legal community had taken note. Several states were now considering laws that would formally recognize the role of service animals in court cases involving trauma survivors. Training programs for therapy dogs had expanded, and funding for nonverbal communication support in child welfare systems had increased. Emily's case was being taught in law schools as a landmark moment in trauma-informed justice. On a quiet evening, Emily sat by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Max rested his head on her lap. She reached out and gently stroked his fur. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. She whispered softly, "Thank you, Max." Max looked up, tail wagging faintly, as if to say, always. Emily smiled. Her story was no longer just about survival. It was about hope and a new beginning.